okay with it. Certainly want to thank Hillary for this opportunity, for my team and me to share with you what we believe are valuable principles as it relates to the work that the university does, and particularly how do we students or researchers in securing funding or gaining policy victories in the legislative arena. The experts, you've already talked to them. I'm just kind of the guy sitting up in the loge, clapping and applauding the folks who do it on the ground every day. So I'm glad that James and Elizabeth and Taylor are here on this meeting. I know we talked a little bit the last time when we engaged about some specific or some basic rules, I would say, in terms of effective engagement. And I want to maybe narrow down a little bit today and talk to you really actually more concisely about meeting with legislators or policymakers. You know, what does that kind of meeting look like? And so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm glad again that the experts are here to actually provide you with what I think is the wisdom behind what you'll be hearing from today. I'll try and make this nice and concise and brief, and if there's any questions or comments, we can do them as we go, or at the end. I'm comfortable either way. So we're going to talk about what I call selling your research to elected officials. How do you take what you've researched, your project, your issue, your policy, and how do you effectively sell it? You know, there are thousands of universities across the country. There are 15 publics here in Michigan, another 33 privates, I believe, and numerous others who are looking for funding for research, looking for policy answers. The question is, how will you be best positioned to be competitive in this environment? And it is very competitive. And so we're just going to kind of hone in a little bit more on what a meeting with legislators looks like. And be sure this won't be very complex information, but you know, I've watched, there was a presentation being done about the Golden State Warriors. Some of you may know in NBA basketball, they achieved a level of greatness over a 3 or 4 year period where they were winning championships. You know, some injuries have occurred that has sort of slowed that down. But the question was asked, what is it that makes your team so great? What is it that keeps you all winning championships? And they said, our emphasis of the basics. You know, it's not the fancy stuff. It's not the glitz and glam. It's the everyday fundamentals. And so that's really what I'm going to be talking to you all about today, is just some very fundamental principles that we use when it comes to selling our ideas in the public arena. Now, again, last time we looked at the 7 basic rules of effective engagement. We talk about making sure that whatever research you have or whatever policy you're trying to sell, whatever grant you're trying to secure, that you make sure it's well composed, well developed, understandable in language that can be understood by policymakers. You can't keep it in academic speak. Understand what you need, the resources that you need to get your policy done, or what resources you need in terms of the grant funds you're asking. Do you need to reach outward to the community and get grassroots support? We talked about that, as well as what other policymakers do you need to reach out to? And we'll talk again more specifically today about that. What coalitions do you need? People with similar interests. And how do you take the PR, the public relations, the media, and communicate issues that are relevant to your cause? And finally, How do you get that policy adopted or implemented? How do you secure that grant? So that's kind of a review of what we looked at last time. And so today, again, we flipped the page, if you will, on selling your research to elected officials, giving you all some general guidelines on productive meetings on funding and policy. It's a shameless, probably 8-year-old picture of myself and Senator Peters. We both were a lot less gray, but I thought I'd use that because, I'm graying pretty quickly in this job. But also, as you can see, we have students with us in Lansing that we engage on the ground, and we do general advocacy, and we allow students to do the work, if you will. They lead the meetings and the discussions. Senator Chang, for instance, who represents Wayne State's in her area, is meeting directly with a student talking about issues. And so students are welcome in the advocacy work of the university. So let's talk about effective ways to sell your research. This is absolutely principle number one. Do not engage in meetings with elected officials without coordinating with government and community affairs. Now, this is not because, we're trying to be dictatorial or that we're trying to, rule with an iron fist, but it really is to ensure that we have the same messaging overall, and that we're not bumping places in the public square. There is actually a university policy that dictates that all outreach to elected officials has to be coordinated with my office or the office of the president, and the president will kick it back down to my office. But also, really, this is to not only ensure that our messaging is the same and our priorities are the same, but we are a resource. We can probably get a meeting with an elected official much more quickly. We can facilitate the meeting. We can help secure the space or the logistics, especially in DC. You cannot manage to get around DC without James Williams. James Williams knows where every office is. He knows the nooks and crannies. He knows how to get around the tunnels. Unfortunately, because of COVID and of course the incident that occurred in the aftermath of the election, the Capitol is not as accessible, but James still knows how to get to those folks. So we are a great resource. Elizabeth, a great resource in helping make those connections. And so we can layer on some things that you may not know about that the university is doing that can help your cause, help your policy, help your issue. And so we bring a university-wide perspective in those discussions. And so we're there to help to secure the meetings, to facilitate the meeting, and to help follow up. So to that end, again, I'm glad that they're all on the call. But for Lansing issues, there's Elizabeth Cutter, and her contact information is there. As you can see, James, he's not even aged one day. That picture's old, but he hasn't aged one day. He's our Director of Federal Affairs, and Taylor Trott Newman, who works in our Health Affairs area. They're all there. Those are their cell phone numbers. Those are their email addresses. If you need them, please, by all means, get in touch with them, and they'll be glad to support the work you're doing. So principle one, always coordinate with government affairs when you meet with elected officials. Number two, when you talk about a meeting with an elected official, do not schedule in your mind an hour, because you will likely not get it. Sometimes you can. We've had meetings that have been that long, but you really want to target a 15-minute meeting. If you get 30, that's fine, because it gives you a little bit of time. But legislators are busy, and they will often be called out of meetings for votes or caucuses. And so you just don't know. You may have an hour on their calendar, 15 minutes might be with the legislator and the rest with the staff. So you must be very, very cognizant of the time. Be on time. In fact, being on time, there's a band director at Florida A&M, and I'm blanking on his name, but he always says, if you're on time, you're late. If your meeting's at 2 and you arrive at 2, you're late. You need to get there 10 minutes to 2. You want to be there early. And so when I say be on time, get there about 10 minutes. And then in the meeting, don't go on and on and on and overstay your welcome. If the meeting was till 2:15 or 2:30, at that time, say, well, we appreciate it. And if the legislator keeps going, that's fine too. But don't overstay your welcome by continuing to talk when the time is up. That time that you schedule a meeting, that should include all of the small talk, all the introductions. So you got to know how to, get through that meeting in short order. And any time that you get over 15 minutes, I always call that bonus time. We've actually had, some of you may recall the late John Conyers, who we would go in his office and, we'd have a 15-minute meeting schedule. We get down to business, but there were times when 30 minutes later, after the meeting should have ended, we're still there talking to him. His office was like a museum with artifacts and historical items, which were very relevant, particularly to Detroit and to DC. He was the dean of the Congress. He was the oldest member or the longest serving member for a while after John Dingell retired, the late John Dingell. And John Dingell was another one who would very much go off into conversing 20 and 30 minutes after your meeting. So we counted those as bonuses. We learned to be respectful. But one other thing about watching your time, if you have multiple meetings, you got to schedule in time to get from one meeting to the next. Your meeting may be on the other side of the Capitol. And so it may take you 20 to 25 minutes just to get to your other meeting. So you got to know the lay of the land. And again, that's where James Williams comes in very handy. In Lansing, it's a little more walkable, but you still need to understand it could be a 10-minute walk. All meetings are not in the Capitol. They could be across the street. And so just be flexible in terms of your meeting times and give enough space between meetings to make sure you get there. And by the way, team, if you have color commentary, always feel free to jump in as well.
I was going to just add, how do you end the meeting? Stand up. That's all you have to do. Just stand up. I mean, because as Patrick said, even though sometimes the member wants to keep it going, if you leave it in 15 minutes, or if they give you 30 minutes, when you leave, oh, we can keep, no, we got to go to our next meeting. That guarantees you'll get another meeting. If you stay there an hour, well, oh my God, they came here last time, they talked an hour. No, that's how you end the meeting. I learned this as a young staffer. My boss will say, James, I have 15 minutes. And so at the end of the meeting, you just stand up. Thank you very much for your time. Here's our one pager, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, James. And most of them will know to end meetings, but you'll be surprised. Many of them, just because of their interest in what you're doing and but you want to be gracious and respectful. So you'll know the balance and you'll know when. The third thing that I talk about, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. We have a question in the chat that relates to Principle 1. So Maya Bergman was asking, she ended up sitting next to U.S. Representative Vern Ehlers on a plane from DC, and also sitting next to a state representative at a fundraiser. And she's wondering if she in those situations should avoid talking about any policy or referring to certain policies per the principle number 1 of talking to Wayne State government and community affairs first.
Excellent question. In fact, that is a perfect kind of question, because it occurred to us that that might happen. But by all means, if you have a personal audience with an elected official, take advantage of that opportunity, but understanding that you should be careful in that to go too far. You don't want to misrepresent the university. If you have a topic of interest that you're interested in, I would introduce the topic. And but the takeaway from that informal meeting at a dinner or on a plane is, I would love to come and sit down with you and your staff, because it's the staff you really want to inform. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. More about this issue. May I follow up? And so, yeah, I would say, while those informal meetings can be very helpful and useful to kind of introduce your idea or pique the interest, requesting the meeting, which should be the takeaway of that, gives you a chance to prepare. It gives you a chance to get us engaged, and you'll be even more productive, in my opinion, in that follow-up. Thank you for that question.
Yep. As Patrick
Are there
said,
any others before we move forward?
I was just going to add to what you said.
Go ahead,
Patrick.
James.
The reason why, if you see a member of Congress, wherever you are, of course, as Patrick said, you have the First Amendment, right, of course, to address them. But what you want is a takeaway. So the big takeaway is, what you need to do is, hey, Congressman Ehlers, good to see you. I'm worried about Pell Grants, and could I get the name of your scheduler so we can have a meeting with your staff? That's what you want, because members of Congress get bombarded all the time with those type of requests. What you want is, may I get your card? I'd like to get the name of your scheduler, and a team of us would like to come see your staff, either in Michigan or in Detroit, to talk about the importance of Pell Grants and why they need to be doubled. And that's when, you reach out to Patrick or myself. Hey, we have a meeting with Mr. Ehlers in Washington, D.C., and we'd like to, I'll be out, and I'll typically go with you, because that way I can shuttle you through the hall, and I know the staffer. So that, James, hey, I know, we love the congressman, but here's some students from Wayne State who will be directly affected and can tell you why Pell Grants need to be doubled. So that's what you do.
And certainly for any of you, we'll allow you to own the meeting, so to speak. We're just there to be supportive. And again, where there's a trusted asset, sometimes the conversation can go over your head in terms of the issue. It may be other issues that we may be far more familiar with from a university's perspective, where we can chime in. But we'll be glad to help let you lead and own the meeting yourself. You were the one who secured it, right? So again, we want to be a resource. And so thank you for that. Number 3, we talked about knowing the members' area of interest. So obviously there are some pet issues that many members have, from a policy standpoint, from a funding standpoint, and some of them just have areas of interest that are their pet causes. If you can, it would be good to know what those are. What is this? What committees is this member on? What policies have they pushed? But they may have some other interest, hobbies, and other causes that they like. And so a little research might help you find out what things interest that member. And that's, again, where James and Elizabeth and Taylor can be helpful, because if they don't know, they might be able to help understand what those things are. And again, they can be legislative, they can be personal. And also, if you can know some of the member staff and maybe some things that they are interested in. A prime example of that comes to my mind was Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley, who served under our last governor, Rick Snyder. One of his issues was autism. He was very interested because he had an autistic child. And so he was interested in all things autism. And the great research that's going on in Wayne State's campus led to us actually having him come down and meet with many of the folks who were doing research in that area and doing work in that area, and it was not an issue that was on the legislative agenda, but one that he had an interest in, and it ended up, if I'm not mistaken, ended up with us actually getting some work, some funding to do more work in that area as it relates to his interest, his personal interest. So it's always important to know what turns their crank. Some may be big reading advocates, right? If you know they're reading advocates, then you may want to be versed up on what is it that the university is doing to promote reading, to promote literacy. And so, again, it's just one of those things that's very, very helpful to know. And I know that a lot of times it may just be through our relationship building. James, Taylor, and Elizabeth do a lot of interaction. People call it smoozing. We don't smooth for smooth's sake. We build relationships because information is power, information is important, and we take that information, and as we're developing agendas for meetings, we get to know these areas of interest. And so if the member likes golf, you know, you got to talk about that that par you shot, or you know, you got to talk about, you know, that golf outing that you'd love to see him at, but then turn your issue or turn your attention to the issue at hand. But just know those areas of interest, and it's always good when there are areas that intersect maybe with your policy or maybe intersect with some other priority of the university. But it's also just good to know those things that they like. They might like collecting red buttons. Make sure you wear something with red buttons that day, right? So principle number 4, you gotta stay focused on your issues. And so I know there's that small talk, there's those that little chatter that happens, but you have a certain obligation and a certain goal you're trying to achieve. And trust me, if you don't focus on your issue, time goes quickly. 15 minutes is not a lot of time. 30 minutes isn't necessarily a lot of time. And so you want to stay focused. You want to stay on topic, speak to your issue or your issues, and don't let the conversation drift, even if it's the member. Remember, members, you know, they have all this institutional memory. James and I sat with members, you know, some of the Michigan delegation have been traditionally some of the long Dingle, Conyers, the Levin brothers. You get into a conversation with them and oh my goodness, I mean, it's like a history lesson, but you have to kind of say, well, member, I'm glad that you mentioned that, but I know your time is short, so by the way, and you just got to figure out a way, and it's an art as much as a science, to bring that conversation back on point, knowing also in every meeting I've been in, there's been a staffer in the room, either the chief of staff or some other legislative staff in the room that you know is taking notes, and you want to make sure you're acknowledging them and addressing them, and they can help you keep the meeting on point as well. And one of the ways you can help do that is to make sure you have your points outlined succinctly. You wanna go in there with your talking points all lined up, and you want to hit all of your main points, but you gotta stay focused, because if you don't stay focused, you'll lose focus. And if you lose focus, you can lose a grand opportunity to move your agenda forward. Be mindful of body language. Are you keeping your listeners' attention? I know all of us have been in meetings where, you know, the person's doing like this, or, you know, you might get, you know, one of these. You got to learn to read body language because people are speaking loudly. In fact, sometimes body language will tell you more than they'll actually tell you with their lips. You can sense whether people are being receptive to you, agreeing with you, or whether they're putting up some resistance all based on their body language. So you need to learn to adjust or respond to the body language that you're hearing. Acceptance is no need to keep on with a hard sell or overselling. Try to get to what the close is. If you're dealing with hesitancy, try to dig out what that hesitancy is, but make sure you can hear what they're saying with their body. And that's why I always say on Zoom, we're at a disadvantage. These virtual meetings, they leave a lot to be desired because you can't always read all of the language. There's so much missing. I will always be one who loves the in-person meeting versus phone or video conferencing, because I can read the room better. Plus, you can set the tone better when you're in the room. You can change the atmosphere, not only with your body language, but with your verbal language. You can have the skill to lighten up the ambiance, but also you got to be careful of your body language. You got to be careful that you're not emitting messages that you're not trying to send, because the things that you do with your hands, your arms, your head can all speak very, very loudly. Principle 6, and James mentioned this a little earlier, leave information behind, and as best you can, make it short and sweet. And we talked a little bit about that in our last presentation, but there should be something that you leave behind, very specifically outlining your project or your ask and the impact of the ask. And these, they have to be short and sweet, because you got to remember, these folks are seeing people all day, and they do not have time, to go over 1,000-page document. You'll overload them. And so if you can give them, if you do have 1,000 pages that are you just got to give it to them, make sure there's a 1-page summary on the top of it, because it's. Yes, was there a question?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in to highlight your point. This is Taylor, Patrick.
Oh, thank you, Taylor.
Just to highlight your point, I was actually study the other day that surveyed policymakers, and I'm not sure specifically, at what level, whether it was state or federal, but an overwhelming majority said that they skimmed leave behind materials for high level understanding. I think it was like 15% said they read for details. So just highlighting what Patrick's saying, do short and sweet bullet points. Just think about that as you're putting together material.
Absolutely. And thank you for that data, Taylor. I tell you, I have a team that they know their stuff. And speaking of knowing their stuff, I'm just going to give you an example of some one-pagers that we've used this year with respect to some issues. And believe it or not, these are probably more verbose than we normally would have on a one-pager. But certainly, the first one you see on the left side of the screen is our priorities for the year. There are 5 policy priorities that the university is speaking about in the public arena. The second one is really a good item that we use in our meeting. It's a 1-page fact sheet about Wayne State and the overall impact of the university. No matter what issue you're dealing with, that leave behind just kind of gives you why Wayne State's important. There's a 1-pager regarding the National De-Escalation Training Center, which we're looking at funding opportunities for both on the federal and the state level. And I believe that last one is our MIDOCS, a very important program that Wayne State probably serves as the main spearheader of, but it's a collaboration or a consortium of, I believe, 4 different institutions of higher learning that have medical schools designed to help develop more practice and serve in rural and underserved communities. So those are examples of short, sweet, to the point leave behinds that you want to be able to do it. So you can put 1,000-page binder under it, but like Taylor said, for this, because they want to know the high level information. And I think the last thing I'll talk about.
Sorry,
yes,
we have another question
please.
in the chat. So regarding sort of training to speak with lawmakers, that's what we're doing here. But when we're actually coming up with something and that we want to present to a local lawmaker, is there opportunity or time to do that with a staff in the WSU Government and Community Affairs Office? Could we practice like our one-pager with you, if that makes sense?
You threw that one up like a softball. Taylor, Elizabeth, and James are more than eager for you to contact them and work with you on any that you need. That's what my team is here for. We will gladly work with you and help to distill your work. Use us.
And matter of fact, in the past, when Patrick and I have led delegations of researchers to Washington, D.C., the night before, we would sit and meet with them. This is how you need to talk to these individuals. They don't need to know all the complete details. Get to the point. What does your research do, and why is it important to the United States?
By the way,
Oops,
go ahead.
Just to add to that, this is kind of what the series was developed for, is that we can come together as a group, as SciPol Detroit, work with Vice President Lindsey's office to develop, 2 or 3 key issues that we want to kind of rally together towards. And actually the last 2 meetings of the series is exactly that. We're developing those kind of issues that are in line with Wayne State's principles. So we're prepared to have those meetings with state level and federal level lawmakers. So bring those issues there, but I'm so glad that we have you all as resources if we want to, attack other issues kind of separately. So kind of stay tuned, and we're very excited for that. And at some point during this call, Vice President Lindsey, maybe you can update us on kind of the Zoom versus in-person situation. And we haven't put any dates on the calendar yet for those meetings with lawmakers, but assuming that will be sometime later this spring, early summer-ish, if you can speculate on kind of what that could look like for this group.
Well, I can tell you now, and thank you for that question. 2 things. Number one, in terms of working with you all, we're looking forward to that. And, we can even do some role playing too, if you all want, just to kind of get a feel for the tone and tenor of those kinds of meetings. But as it relates to when we engage and how we engage, it'll be different in Lansing versus DC. Elizabeth can speak to Lansing. Right now, there are some lawmakers meeting face to face. One thing, though, that we try to balance out is ensuring that our employees and students are safe. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and although we're seeing some light potentially at the end of the tunnel, we want to just ensure that if we go into an in-person meeting, that all safety protocols are in place. And some, unfortunately, it's been politicized, this pandemic response. And there are lawmakers who their staffs nor the lawmakers are wearing masks or practicing social distancing. So I think we'll still be sort of on a case-by-case basis, but right now we're tending not to do as many in person. And Elizabeth, you may want to speak to more to Lansing, but in DC right now, there aren't any face-to-face yet. But in Lansing, Elizabeth, if you could expound.
Yeah, I think Patrick really hit the nail on the head. It is political, and there is no other way than that to really explain it. I would say that in terms of effectiveness, the Zoom platform or an e-platform, virtual platform, has been an opportunity to really be able to connect with legislators. And, Patrick talked about it a bit earlier, and, Taylor and James both touched on it too. The nice part about virtual is that you do have this sort of attention span that you wouldn't normally have if you're in back-to-back in-person meetings. What I've seen at the state level is members are really more dedicated to what's happening in front of them because there's not as much opportunity to be distracted by other things going on in their office, the next place they have to get to, or whatever external factors or people dropping in. Like part of my job and James's job is to drop in on people. But you can't do that as easily sort of in the virtual world. So there's been a really big pro that it seems like people are more engaged and are able to have more quick and succinct conversations that are really, really detail focused and oriented. Again, cannot speak higher for the leave behind, having something that says, this is what our goal is, this is what we want to do. Even I think to the end of what we've done on a number of these pieces is give them something to react to. So if you're looking for a change in the budget, consider drafting budget boilerplate that they can then just hand in and say like, hey, I had this great idea come to my attention. I want to put this in the budget. I want to fund it. We can certainly help you design and do those kinds of pieces. Same with legislative changes. Do your background and your research on where it is that it fits into the MCLs. And then the minute the compiled laws, you've got an idea of where you want to put it, you have a better opportunity to say like, hey, I drafted this language so you can take it to the Legislative Service Bureau and hand it in immediately instead of empowering them to take, your idea and translate it into whatever they feel is right. Give them something to work with and react to. But yeah, I mean, from the virtual to in person, I think virtual is still really impactful. On the political side, there are a number of members at the state level that really want to do in person and want to believe that the pandemic is over. That
or that it never happened.
Right, or that it never happened. And that unfortunately is not the case. And to Patrick's point, we have abided by what works best at the university and been really thinking about the science and the data around the pandemic. And I think until that that there's a safe spot for people to interact in person, we've kept that really minimal and focused again on opportunities to do virtual where it really has felt like a good, candid audience and an engaged audience pretty regularly.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you for that question. Lastly, I'll just talk about a little bit about follow-up after the meeting. A very, very important point here. Before the end of the meeting, always find out who it is that you follow up with. They may offer that, but be sure you leave with the correct person to follow up with on your issue. You'd be surprised how many people talk about following up, but don't get a name and you'll just go into the black hole. So always identify who to follow up with. And then you always, and this is again, very fundamental, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do it. Send a thank you note to the members that you visited. Email, handwritten, although handwritten really won't get through very quickly in either setting, federal or state, except when you know that you have a James or an Elizabeth or a Taylor who can hand deliver your notes. So you just want to make sure you follow up, especially when they have information that they've requested. Be quick to get it. And I tell you, my team, I've been blessed to have one of the best teams in the business. You ask for some information, they're going to get it to you. And they will do, a lot of times it requires us to go back to various departments, various individuals in the university to get it. And, it can be pulling teeth, but my team will get that information and get back to that staff. That is absolutely essential, the follow-up. And at the appropriate time, you may, if you want to kind of see the status of where things are, at the appropriate time, you will want to make a call or an email. And I think in these days and times, email is probably the most effective way, although James and Elizabeth and Taylor may have cell phone numbers to the key stakeholders in those offices, whereas most of you won't. But an email follow-up might be in order as well. And you can even talk about when you leave that meeting or before you leave that meeting, what's an appropriate time frame in which to follow up. So follow-up though is key after any meeting. And then I'll just end real quickly with a few of what I call additional tips. We already talked about this last time, but again, just make sure that there may be some other organizations or individuals who are aligned with your interests. You may just want to be sure to leverage any others who are working for your same cause. Make sure, and this is where my team, this is what we do, but you got to know that staff. You got to know that chief, that legislative director, that district staff. It may not be as important for any of you all unless you know you're going to have long-term interaction. Because again, this is where my team, this is what we do. They have a great relationship with all the folks in these offices, but feel free to build relationships of your own. Keep the folks informed of the progress that you're making on your issue. And again, this is where TMEC emails, I'll start to say T-mails, but text and emails are fine. I mentioned this a little earlier. These communications to members should be hand delivered by our directors. They can assist you because snail mail, I don't even think they accept snail mail in the Capitol, James, or does it take a couple of months or whatever? And I don't know how long it takes for something to get through in Lansing, but getting them to our people on the ground, that's the best way to get it to that office. James, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that with regard to Patrick, snail mail, you're right. Snail mail takes a while, but one thing Patrick said, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is the thank you. I mean, even when I do, but when I do my Zoom meetings or with staff, I treat that as a meeting. And so I will send a letter in the mail to that staff. Yeah, it gets there 2.5 weeks later. But as Patrick said, because there's so few staff now, everybody's getting email. When they see that letter show up, oh, that's a Wayne State thank you. Matter of fact, it's become famous among the Michigan delegation. That's a Wayne State thank you. And so that's something that also helps you stand out. But Patrick is absolutely right. Send an email. I do both. I send an email thank you, and I send a snail mail thank you, so that it's kind of commemorated, but it's really appreciated by the staff. And matter of fact, whenever I have, like, for example, whenever Cy Poly will come to Washington, D.C., I will already know not just the staff that you're going to meet with, but the scheduler. We will already have our thank you letters all ready for the scheduler. So when we walk in, here, thank you very much. They've already got that letter. Then we'll get the specific person we've met with. I try to get those done even before the meeting is done, so that when we walk in there, here, thank you for your time. And they remember that.
And thank you, James. And by the way, James mentioned mailing things. He's only mentioning them in terms of the last year during the pandemic. He's notorious about hand carrying communications to those offices, but he's had to learn how to use US mail. Support the other branch of government, James.
You're right.
And then lastly, I'll say that we always offer, what else can we do to help you do your job? What priorities do you have over and above what we're asking that the university or Cy Poly can help with? You want to make yourself available to be a resource to them as much as they are a resource to you. And so really, I'll stop at this point. I know we have a few minutes left for any questions or comments, even kind criticism. I take that as well.
Yeah, feel free to type it in the chat or unmute and say it out loud. But thank you so much, Vice President Lindsey. This is super informative, given that personally I have never looked into meeting with a lawmaker, had the opportunity to. So this information is really so valuable to everyone in this call. So your time is much appreciated, in addition to Mr. Williams, Ms. Cutter, and Ms. Newman. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's our great pleasure. We love it. We're not just here advocating on your behalf. We love interacting with you and working alongside you to help you all accomplish your goals. And one of these days, I'm almost certain that one of you all will be sitting in one of these seats. In spite of where you are now, you'd be surprised how many of you people who are in research or doing the kind of academic work you're doing now end up serving in the policy arena, like Elizabeth, James, and Taylor.
So we had one question pop up in the chat from Haneen. Oh, we have a few coming in. Okay, I'll start with the first one. From Haneen, it says, when it comes to email communication, what is the expected time frame to receive a reply from the policymakers that you spoke with?
I'll let James and Elizabeth maybe handle that.
Elizabeth, go ahead. I'll follow Elizabeth.
Okay. It really depends. I'm assuming the question is, if I sent an email to a legislator asking them a question, how long should I wait for them to respond to me? It really depends. Some members are really fast and really great. There's plenty of members that I might send 1, 2, 3, 4 follow-up emails to. I think the key there, and James and Patrick have both highlighted it too, include a staff member. So if you met with a staff member, CC them too. Oftentimes member emails, especially, and I think this is true of any level of government, especially their like official email. So their, rep so-and-so at house.mi.gov gets an incredible volume of emails. So if you're able to include a staff member and be really sort of specific in your ask and specific in the email, you'll see a response faster. But don't feel, I think, dejected if you have to follow up, or if you choose to follow up. Again, those are opportunities for you to highlight your commitment to your issue and your commitment to helping them out too. So never think that a follow-up is a bad thing. They just get an incredible volume of emails.
And then I think there's a question regarding how do you gauge whether you're being taken seriously in these meetings. I think that most lawmakers are there with an interest to help. You can gauge when just, again, that whole body language or the tone and tenor of the meeting, you can engage, or you can gauge the interest of the member, but that's where the relationships come. You may have a very good issue, a very sound issue. You may have made a very good pitch. And in fact, the member may even be interested in your issue. But this is where relationships with the staff is important. That chief of staff or some other member of that team, you should be able to go and get the real skinny, if you will. James and Taylor and Elizabeth, they know how to gain that information. They can either tell by the responses in the meeting or through the follow-up with the legislative staff, or sometimes just even understanding the department that you're meeting with, their budget priorities. There's so many different ways to gauge that. But that's why, again, our team is helpful. So the advice is, after the meeting, we always tend to do debriefs, either a quick call or just some kind of a follow-up. And then we can determine, hey, do you think we got a chance here? There have been meetings where we have great ideas, but we know they won't happen this budget cycle. And so why keep pushing right now? Let's set up the scenario so that maybe we're in a better position next year. And so there are so many different ways, but to gauge whether you've been taken seriously, that's another one of those things that's a part art, part science, in that my team can be helpful in.
Exactly. And the only thing I have to add is that understand politics is a long game. You may not win this cycle. That is, you may not get what you want. Excuse me. You may get a half a loaf this time. But as I tell people all the time, Oh, I wish I could have gotten a full loaf. I said, you can make a whole lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with half a loaf. And then you just work to get the rest of the loaf the next cycle. It's a long game. As I said before, the Americans with Disabilities Act was introduced in 1971 by Ron Dellums. It didn't become law until 20 years later.
Thanks, James, for that perspective. I think there was a question with respect to do caseworkers still staff incoming communications? You do have interns, you do have other entry-level staffers who may be the person who is filtering the communications. It's still done that way to a great degree. At the state level, there are far less staffers that are paid on the role just due to budgets. And so sometimes there is an intern or there's a one person, I do it all kind of scenario that goes on. But yes, most of those communications will not be directly responded to by the lawmaker themselves or the policymaker themselves. And the other question is, are there any organizations that bridge these gaps between policymakers and researchers in Washington? And I know James can talk about the Science Coalition and others, but you have the opportunity, Ryan, to pursue graduate studies in DC, and you're looking for opportunities in those kind of arenas. I'm sure that James can be very, very helpful with you in that regard.
Yes, that's correct.
I think our time may have just expired. So I'm going to, again, simply say thank you to Hillary and to Shreya and all of you for just giving me this opportunity, my team this opportunity to interact with you. We look forward to the continued work of this group. You all are going to really do some great things. And we're looking to be a part of watching you all thrive as you enter into the world of policymaking.